The dog froze in front of a storage unit no one wanted, and the man who spent his last $100 on it realized too late why. The shot cracked through the trees as Caleb slammed into the mud, dragging Bruno down with him. His hands hit something cold and metal buried beneath the dirt. Not natural, not old. Bruno's growl shifted, low, urgent, eyes locked on the ridge above where someone had just moved. Caleb didn't look up. Not yet. Because whatever they were protecting was already in his hands. Rain slid off the rusted tin roofs in thin, steady lines, tapping out a rhythm across the abandoned storage yard at the edge of the Appalachian foothills. The place smelled like wet metal and old oil, the kind of smell that clung to the back of your throat. A flickering light buzzed overhead, cutting shadows into sharp, broken angles across the gravel. Caleb Hayes stood just inside the chain-link gate, one hand resting against the cold metal post. His fingers twitched without warning. Clink. Somewhere down the row, a loose panel rattled in the wind. Clink. His jaw tightened. For a split second, the yard wasn't a yard anymore. It was dust and heat and the low hum of radios. A convoy stalled in a narrow pass, the metallic rattle of gear. Someone whispering over comms. Contact left. Caleb blinked hard. The rain snapped back into focus. Kentucky, not Helmand. He exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, the way they'd drilled into him years ago. Inhale, hold, release. Count the exits. Fence line. Gate behind him. Office shack to the right. No movement. At his side, Bruno didn't move. The German shepherd stood rigid, muscles locked beneath his damp coat, ears forward, eyes fixed down the row of storage units. Not barking, not pacing, just staring. Caleb followed his gaze. Unit 214. It looked no different than the others. Corrugated metal door, rust bleeding down from the hinges, a faded number stenciled crookedly across the front. Rain pooled along the concrete lip, dripping off the edge in slow, heavy drops. Nothing there, Caleb muttered, voice rough from disuse. Just another empty box. Bruno didn't react, didn't even blink. A low sound rolled up from deep in the dog's chest. Not a bark, not even a growl meant to warn. It was quieter than that. Tighter, like something held back. Caleb shifted his weight, boots crunching lightly against gravel. His first instinct was to leave. He'd learned that the hard way. When something felt off, you moved. You didn't wait around to figure out why. He turned slightly toward the gate. Bruno stayed. The leash went taut. Caleb stopped. "Come on," he said, giving a light pull. "We're not here for this." Nothing. The dog leaned forward instead, claws scraping softly against the wet ground, body angled toward the unit like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Caleb frowned. Bruno wasn't a barker, never had been. Back when Caleb first found him, half-starved behind a rural shelter, ribs showing, eyes too sharp for a stray, the dog had barely made a sound. But he watched, always watched, and he was never wrong. Caleb let the leash slacken. Rain ran down the back of his neck, cold and steady. He stepped forward slowly, eyes moving the way they used to, checking corners, scanning shadows, tracking anything out of place. The rows of units stretched on either side, silent except for the rain and the distant hum of a highway far beyond the hills. Unit 214 waited at the end of the row. Nothing moved around it. No footprints in the mud except his own. No tire tracks fresh enough to matter. Just the door, closed tight, water streaking down its surface. Bruno took one careful step forward, then another. Caleb followed, each step measured, shoulders tight, breathing steady. The closer they got, the heavier the air felt. Not thicker. Just wrong. Like a room that had been closed too long. He stopped a few feet from the door. The metal surface was dented near the bottom, like something had struck it hard once. The lock hung loose, rust creeping over the edges. But it wasn't broken. Just old. Caleb reached out, fingers brushing the cold steel. For a moment, everything went quiet. No rain, no wind. Just the faint ringing in his ears, the kind that came right before something went bad. He pulled his hand back. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath. "I hear it too." Bruno's ears twitched. The low rumble in his chest deepened, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. The dog shifted closer, pressing lightly against Caleb's leg, not in fear, but in readiness. Caleb glanced down at him. "You think there's something in there?" Bruno didn't look up. His eyes stayed locked on the door. A drop of water slid off the edge of the roof and hit the concrete with a sharp tap. Caleb's shoulders tightened again. Clink. The sound came from inside. Soft, barely there, metal brushing against metal. Caleb froze. The yard stretched silent behind him. No footsteps. No voices. No cars pulling in through the gate. Just that one sound. Too faint to be anything, and too precise to be nothing. He leaned in slightly, head tilted, listening. Nothing. Just the rain again. He let out a slow breath, but it didn't ease the tension in his chest. "Probably nothing," he said, though the words felt hollow. Bruno didn't move. Caleb looked at the door one more time, then back toward the gate. He could walk away, find somewhere dry for the night, forget about it. That was the smart move, always had been. He tightened his grip on the leash, then loosened it again. "All right," he said quietly. "Not to the dog. Not really. To hell with it." Bruno's tail gave a single, slow wag. Caleb stepped closer to Unit 214, rain dripping from the brim of his cap, eyes narrowing as he studied the lock. Whatever was behind that door, it wasn't empty, and Bruno already knew it. The question was, why did it feel like it was waiting for him? Caleb didn't answer the thought. He'd learned a long time ago not to chase questions like that. Questions got you killed. You observed, you assessed, you moved. But his boots didn't turn away. Behind him, a voice carried through the rain. "All right, folks. Last call. We're starting up." Caleb glanced back toward the front of the yard. A handful of people had gathered near the office shack. Men in work jackets, a couple in faded ball caps, all huddled under the weak glow of a portable light. The auctioneer stood on the back of a pickup truck, clipboard in hand, his voice cutting through the drizzle like he'd done it 1,000 times. Caleb exhaled slowly. An auction. He hadn't even realized that's what this place was tonight. Storage units, abandoned, unpaid, forgotten, sold off to whoever had cash and a willingness to gamble. He looked down at Bruno. The dog finally broke his stare from the door and glanced up at him just for a second. No sound, just that same steady look. Caleb reached into his coat pocket. The bills were damp from the rain. He counted them without looking. $100. That was it. Everything he had left. Enough for a few days of food if he stretched it. Maybe a cheap motel room if he got lucky. Or... He looked back at Unit 214. Another drop of water hit the concrete. Clink. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath. "I hear it." The auctioneer called out again, louder this time. "Let's get moving, people! We got a full row tonight." Caleb hesitated for half a second longer. Then he turned and walked toward the crowd. Bruno fell in beside him without needing a command. The group smelled like damp denim, cigarettes, and old coffee. Nobody paid Caleb much attention at first. Just another drifter passing through. His coat was worn thin at the elbows, boots scuffed from miles of walking. He kept his head down, eyes moving. Always moving. Hands, pockets, distance between bodies. Who stood too still, who talked too much. Same habits, different battlefield. A man with a red cap leaned toward his buddy and nodded at Caleb. Guy looks like he lost a fight with the rain. Low laughter. Caleb didn't react. The auctioneer clapped his hands once. All right, Unit 210, who's got 50 to start? Voices rose. Bids bounced back and forth, quick and casual. Money moved easy here, people throwing it around like it didn't matter. Caleb stayed quiet, watching. Unit after unit opened. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect. Broken furniture, old mattresses, boxes of junk no one wanted. Still, people bid. They always did. Hope made people stupid, or desperate. Caleb shifted his weight slightly, eyes flicking toward the far end of the row. Unit 214 sat there, untouched. The rain had picked up, turning the gravel into slick patches of mud. The light didn't quite reach that far, leaving the door half swallowed in shadow. The auctioneer checked his clipboard. All right, next up, Unit 214. Caleb felt it before he thought it. Bruno's body stiffened beside him. The dog didn't bark, didn't move forward, just locked in. The crowd turned lazily, a few heads angling toward the far unit. Someone squinted. Looks like a dump. Probably Mold City in there. Pass. The auctioneer shrugged. All right, who's got $30 just to open it up? Silence. Rain filled the space between them. Caleb's fingers curled slightly at his side. $30. Nobody moved. The auctioneer tried again, voice thinner now. Come on, folks. $30. That's lunch money. Still nothing. A man in a denim jacket chuckled. Not worth the trouble. Caleb's eyes flicked back to the unit. Clink. Soft. Faint. But there. His pulse shifted. He didn't think 30. His own voice sounded unfamiliar. Rough. Like gravel dragged across steel. Heads turned. The man in the red cap smirked. Well, look at that. The auctioneer blinked, then nodded. Got 30. Do I hear 40? No one answered. Rain tapped harder against the metal roofs. Caleb swallowed once, then added, 100. That got a reaction. A few laughs, a whistle. Man's buying himself a coffin. Waste of oxygen and cash. Caleb didn't look at them. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow, then lifted his hand. 100 going once. Bruno shifted closer, pressing lightly against Caleb's leg, going twice. Caleb's eyes stayed on the dark outline of Unit 214. Sold. The gavel cracked against the truck bed. The sound snapped sharp through the rain. For a second, Caleb didn't move. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out the damp bills, and handed them over without a word. The auctioneer counted quickly, stuffed the money away, and tossed him a small, rusted key. Good luck, he said, not bothering to hide the sarcasm. Caleb caught it clean. The metal felt colder than it should have. Behind him, someone laughed again. Hope you like trash, soldier. Caleb turned back toward the row. Bruno was already moving. The dog didn't wait this time. He headed straight for Unit 214. Caleb followed, the key tight in his hand, the weight of it settling deeper than it should. Every step felt heavier. Not regret. Not yet. Something else. Something that had been quiet for a long time. Starting to wake up. Caleb stopped a few feet from the door, rain dripping from the brim of his cap, running down the back of his neck. The noise from the crowd behind him had faded, swallowed by distance and weather. Out here, it was just the rain and the unit. Bruno stood close, shoulder brushing Caleb's knee, eyes fixed on the lock. The key sat cold in Caleb's palm. He didn't rush it. Instead, he stepped to the side of the door first, placing himself just off the center line. Old habit. Never stand in front of something you haven't cleared. His eyes scanned the edges, hinges, seams, the gap along the bottom. No light, no movement. But the silence. It wasn't empty. Caleb slid the key into the lock. For a second, it didn't turn. Then, click. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Bruno's ears snapped forward. Caleb froze. Nothing followed. No footsteps. No shifting inside. Just rain tapping steady against metal. He turned the handle slowly, easing the latch loose instead of yanking it. The door resisted at first, the rubber seal sticking from years of neglect. Then it gave. The metal rolled upward with a long, dragging groan. Cold air pushed out from inside. Not fresh, not stale, just still, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Caleb didn't step in. He waited, counted. 1, 2, 3. Nothing moved. All right, he murmured. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small flashlight. The beam flickered once before steadying, weak but enough. He angled it low first, sweeping across the floor before raising it higher. Dust, boxes, a broken chair leaning sideways against the wall. It looked like junk, but not the kind of junk he expected. Everything was stacked, too neatly, too evenly spaced, like someone had taken the time to organize what they left behind. Caleb stepped inside, boots crunching lightly over scattered debris. Bruno followed immediately, nose low, moving with purpose, not sniffing randomly, tracking. His path cut straight across the room toward the back corner. Caleb paused halfway in. The smell hit him then. Not just mold, something sharper, metallic. He swallowed, the taste sitting heavy on his tongue. His light moved across the walls, corrugated steel, rust creeping in thin lines. A bicycle frame leaned against one side, chain missing. Old newspapers stacked in a milk crate. A refrigerator with its door hanging open, dark inside. All worthless. All too perfect. Caleb crouched slightly, running the beam along the floor. There. A faint line. He shifted closer, lowering the light. The concrete near the back corner wasn't uniform. One section was just a shade darker. Edges rough, like it had been poured over something and smoothed in a hurry. Not old enough to match the rest. Bruno reached it before he did. The dog stopped, stiffened, then began to scratch. Fast, deliberate strokes, claws biting into the surface. Easy, Caleb said quietly, though he didn't reach to stop him. Instead, he watched. Bruno wasn't digging blind. He worked a specific spot, nose pressed close, breathing quick, tail low and tight. Caleb set the flashlight on the ground, angling it toward the patch. He pressed his hand flat against the concrete. Cold, but thinner. His fingers tapped lightly. A dull sound, not solid. He leaned closer, ear near the floor. For a second, there was nothing. Then, clink, soft, faint, from beneath. Caleb's chest tightened. He pulled back slowly, eyes narrowing. Someone buried something, he muttered. Bruno let out a low, sharp growl. Not at the floor. Behind them. Caleb turned instantly, hand already moving, body shifting into position before the thought fully formed. The doorway stood open. Rain fell beyond it in gray sheets. Empty. But something had changed. The air felt disturbed, like someone had been standing there a second ago, watching. Caleb held still, listening past the rain. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just the distant echo of water hitting metal roofs. Bruno didn't relax. His gaze stayed locked on the doorway, body angled between Caleb and the outside. Caleb reached for the bent crowbar leaning against the wall without taking his eyes off the entrance. He tested its weight once in his hand. "Not junk," he said under his breath. His eyes flicked back to the dark patch on the floor. Not even close. Bruno shifted, stepping closer to him again, but his attention kept snapping between the floor and the door. Two threats. One hidden, one out there. Caleb moved deeper into the unit, positioning himself where he could see both. He knelt beside the concrete patch, crowbar in hand, the weak beam of the flashlight cutting across the surface. He hesitated for half a second, then drove the metal edge down into the seam. The concrete cracked with a sharp, brittle sound. Bruno flinched, but didn't back away. Caleb pried harder. The surface gave, splitting just enough to reveal something beneath. Metal. Old. Box-shaped. Caleb's grip tightened. Behind him, the rain kept falling. And somewhere out there, something was still watching. Caleb didn't look back this time. He'd already confirmed it once. The absence, the shift in the air, the feeling of being measured from somewhere beyond the rain. Looking again wouldn't change anything. It never did. What mattered was what was in front of him. He drove the crowbar deeper into the cracked seam and pulled. The concrete split further with a dry snap, fragments breaking loose and skittering across the floor. Dust rose in a faint cloud, catching in the beam of the flashlight. Bruno stayed close, one paw resting near Caleb's knee, his body angled toward the doorway. Guarding. Caleb pried again. The slab finally gave way, lifting just enough for him to wedge his fingers underneath. He set the crowbar aside and hauled the broken piece free, revealing the object beneath. A metal box, rectangular, military grade by the look of it. Olive drab paint, long faded and chipped, corners reinforced, lid sealed with thick clasps that had rusted but not failed. It didn't belong in a storage unit filled with discarded furniture and junk. It belonged somewhere controlled, somewhere accounted for. Caleb brushed dirt away with the back of his hand. Stamped faintly across the top were worn markings. Most of it had faded, but one line still held. Property Archive. Below it, barely visible, R.H. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Not random," he murmured. Bruno shifted suddenly, a low growl rising again. Caleb didn't turn. "Hold," he whispered. The dog obeyed, though the tension in his frame didn't ease. Caleb flipped one of the clasps. It resisted, then snapped open with a sharp metallic crack that echoed through the unit. The second clasp followed. He paused, fingers resting on the lid. His breathing slowed. Inhale, hold, release. Then he lifted it. Inside, paper. Stacks of it. Not old newspapers, not junk. Organized bundles tied with faded twine. Thick envelopes. Rolled maps secured with brittle rubber bands. Everything carefully arranged, protected, important. Caleb picked up the top bundle. The paper felt heavier than it should have. He untied the string and opened it, the edges crackling softly. Documents, land deeds, property transfers, coordinates marked in precise notation. His eyes moved faster now, scanning the headers, dates, signatures. The same name appeared again and again. Redstone Holdings. He flipped to another page, then another. Different parcels, different years, all tied to the same company, and every single one, marked with handwritten notes in the margins. Small corrections, symbols, Lines drawn between properties like a network, not random acquisitions. A pattern. Caleb's jaw tightened. "This isn't storage," he said quietly. "It's a map." Bruno's growl deepened. Caleb's head lifted slightly. This time he did turn. The doorway stood empty. Rain still fell in steady sheets, but the pattern had changed. A darker shape moved briefly across the ground outside, just enough to break the rhythm. Then it was gone. Caleb's eyes locked onto the spot. No sound followed. No footsteps. But someone had been there, watching him open the box, watching him find it. Caleb slowly set the papers back into the container, but not the way they'd been. He pulled a few key documents free, folding them once and slipping them inside his coat. Then he closed the lid. Not all the way, just enough to make it look untouched from a distance. Bruno eased closer, brushing against his leg. Caleb reached down, gripping the dog's collar lightly. "Time to move," he murmured. He stood, scanning the unit one last time. Every detail, every angle, burning it into memory. Then he stepped toward the door. The rain hit him immediately, cold and sharp. He paused just outside, eyes sweeping left, then right. Nothing. No vehicles pulling away. No figures slipping between units. But the feeling hadn't left. It had only gotten clearer. They weren't alone. And whoever had been watching now knew exactly what Caleb had found. He tightened his grip on Bruno's collar. "Stay close," he said. The dog didn't need the command. They moved quickly down the row, away from Unit 214, the storage yard stretching out ahead of them like a maze of rust and shadows. Behind them, the open door of the unit creaked once in the wind, then slowly began to roll down on its own. Caleb didn't turn back. He heard it, the grinding slide of metal against metal, but he didn't give it the attention it wanted. That door closing behind him felt too deliberate, too timed, like a message. He kept walking. Gravel shifted under his boots as he moved down the row, Bruno tight at his side, shoulder brushing his leg every few steps. The dog's head stayed low, ears twitching at every change in sound, every ripple of movement carried through the rain. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. By the time they reached the far end of the yard, Caleb had already mapped out 3 exit routes in his head. Gate, fence line, drain ditch cutting behind the property. He angled them toward the ditch. Less visibility, fewer angles, better odds. The rain didn't stop that night. It followed them down into the hollow where an old wooden bridge stretched across a narrow creek. The planks creaked underfoot, slick with moss and age. Beneath it, the ground stayed dry enough to make camp. Caleb crouched under the bridge, setting his pack down carefully. He didn't light a fire. Didn't need the warmth that badly. Light meant attention. Attention meant risk. Bruno circled once, then lay down near the edge, facing outward. Watching. Caleb pulled the folded documents from inside his coat. Even in the dim gray light, the paper looked wrong. Too clean, too preserved. He ran his fingers along one of the maps, tracing the lines drawn across the hills. Parcels connected like veins, routes marked in tight, deliberate handwriting. This wasn't someone hiding scraps. This was someone hiding something big. He leaned back against one of the bridge supports, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the creek. Water moved slow and steady below them, carrying leaves and debris through the dark. For a moment, everything felt still. Then headlights, faint at first, just a glow cutting through the trees. Caleb's body went rigid. Bruno's head snapped up, ears forward, a low warning rumble building in his chest. Caleb reached out, pressing a hand lightly against the dog's shoulder. "Down," he whispered. Bruno obeyed instantly, lowering himself but keeping his eyes locked on the light. The glow grew brighter. A vehicle rolled along the dirt road above the bridge, tires crunching slowly over gravel. Not speeding, not passing through, searching. Caleb's breathing slowed automatically. Inhale, hold, release. The engine idled, doors opened, footsteps, 2 of them. Caleb shifted slightly, angling his body so he could see through the gaps between the planks without exposing himself. Boots. Dark jackets. One man leaned against the side of the vehicle, scanning the area. The other stepped closer to the edge of the bridge, peering down into the shadows below. Too clean. Too controlled. Not locals. Guy couldn't have gone far, one of them said, voice low but clear. Caleb didn't move. He bought the unit, the second man replied. Name's Hayes, former ranger. Caleb's fingers tightened slightly against the damp wood. They knew. Bruno's muscles tensed under his hand. Easy, Caleb breathed, barely audible. The man above shifted his weight, boots creaking on the old planks. Find him before he figures out what he's holding. A pause, then a soft chuckle. Too late for that. Caleb's jaw set. The first man stepped closer to the edge, just enough that Caleb could see the outline of his face through the cracks. Caleb Hayes, he called down into the darkness. Caleb stayed still. Rain tapped against the bridge overhead, masking the silence. We know you're out here, the man continued. No need to make this difficult. Bruno's growl vibrated low, barely contained. Caleb pressed down gently on his shoulder. Hold. The man waited a moment longer, then sighed. All right. Footsteps shifted. The second man spoke again, voice sharper this time. We're not here to hurt you. We just want what you found. Caleb's eyes flicked once toward his pack, then back to the boots above. The first man leaned down slightly, as if trying to catch a glimpse through the darkness. We'll make it worth your time, he added. Cash, enough to get you off the street for good. Bruno's ears flattened. Caleb didn't answer, didn't move. Seconds stretched. Then, the man straightened. Your call, he said, but we'll be seeing you again. Footsteps retreated. Car doors slammed. The engine turned over, then faded slowly into the distance. Only when the sound was completely gone did Caleb allow himself to breathe. Bruno lifted his head, scanning the road above, waiting. Caleb stayed still a few seconds longer, counting, listening. Nothing returned. He finally shifted, sitting up slightly, hand still resting on the dog's neck. They found us fast, he murmured. Bruno huffed quietly, as if in agreement. Caleb looked down at the papers in his hands. Rainwater had smeared part of the ink, but the lines were still clear enough. Coordinates. Routes. Ownership transfers. And something else. He flipped to another page. A red mark. Circled. Higher into the mountains. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Not just storage, he said quietly. Not even close. Bruno nudged his arm, then looked toward the dark ridge beyond the trees. Caleb followed his gaze. The hills rose up black against the storm, silent and waiting. He folded the papers carefully and tucked them back into his coat. All right, he said under his breath. His voice had changed. Quieter, harder. Guess we're not done. Bruno's tail gave a single, slow thump against the dirt. Caleb reached for his pack, pulling it close, already mapping the next move in his head. Up the ridge, away from the road, away from the obvious. Back into terrain he understood. Behind them, the creek kept moving, carrying the sound of rain deeper into the hills. Ahead of them, something bigger was waiting. Caleb didn't sleep. He sat with his back against the damp wooden beam under the bridge, eyes open, listening to the rhythm of the creek and the faint echoes of tires that no longer existed. Every sound came in sharp, separated layers: water, wind, distant branches shifting. His mind sorted them without effort. Anything out of place would stand out. Nothing did. Still, he didn't close his eyes. Bruno stayed awake too. Not restless, not pacing, just alert. Every few minutes his ears of coursomes would twitch toward the ridge above them, then settle again. By first light, the rain had thinned to a mist. Caleb moved before the sun fully cleared the hills. No fire, no tracks left behind. He kicked loose dirt over the spot where they'd rested, brushed out the shallow impressions of his boots, then checked the creek edge. The water had already swallowed most of it. Good enough, he muttered. Bruno was already facing uphill. Caleb followed his line of sight. The ridge rose steep beyond the trees, dark with wet bark and low fog clinging to the slope. According to the map, that was where the marked point lay. Not near the road, not near anything easy, exactly where something valuable would be hidden. He adjusted the strap of his pack and started climbing. The ground changed as they moved higher. Loose gravel gave way to slick roots and moss-covered rock. Caleb angled his path instead of going straight up, cutting across the slope in short, zigzag movements. It was slower, but it kept his profile low and his footing steady. Bruno moved ahead sometimes, then circled back, always checking the wind. When the breeze shifted downhill, the dog paused, nose lifted, reading something Caleb couldn't. Twice he stopped completely. Caleb froze both times without question. They listened together. Once it was just a branch snapping under its own weight somewhere deeper in the woods. The second time, a faint hum. Not natural. Caleb crouched low, scanning through the trees. "Vehicle," he whispered. Bruno's ears angled in the same direction. The sound faded quickly, but it confirmed what Caleb already knew. They were still being tracked. He adjusted their path, cutting further off the obvious line toward the ridge. No straight approach, no patterns. He doubled back once, stepping into a shallow stream for a few yards, before climbing out again. Basic fieldcraft. Nothing fancy, just enough to make them work for it. By midday, the fog thinned. The trees opened slightly, giving way to a narrow shelf carved into the mountainside. From there, Caleb could see across the valley, rolling hills, scattered farmhouses, a thin ribbon of road winding far below. Isolation. Perfect place to hide something no one was supposed to find. Bruno slowed. His posture changed again. Less alert, more focused. He wasn't searching anymore. He was closing in. Caleb felt it too. That same quiet pressure from the storage unit. The sense that something ahead of them wasn't just hidden, but waiting. They moved along the shelf until the trees thickened again, closing off the view. The air cooled, heavy with damp earth and old wood. Then Caleb saw it, a structure, barely visible through the branches. A cabin, or what used to be one. The roof sagged slightly on one side, shingles missing. The wood had weathered to a dull gray, blending almost perfectly with the forest around it. No smoke, no movement. But it wasn't abandoned. Not completely. Caleb crouched low, raising a hand. Bruno stopped instantly. Caleb scanned the area. Ground first. No fresh tire tracks. No clear footprints. But the soil here was hard, covered in leaves. Harder to read. Then the structure itself. Door closed. Windows dark. But one detail stood out. The padlock on the front door. New. Too clean. Caleb's jaw tightened. Someone's still using it, he whispered. Bruno let out a faint, warning rumble. Caleb shifted position, circling slowly to the side of the cabin, keeping distance, using the trees as cover. He moved quiet, controlled, placing each step with care, avoiding loose branches, keeping his weight low. As he reached the side wall, he paused, listened. Nothing. He edged closer, stopping just short of the corner. Bruno stayed just behind him, muscles tight. Caleb leaned slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse around. A metallic click echoed inside. Caleb froze. Not wind, not wood settling, something deliberate. Bruno's growl rose instantly, sharper this time. Caleb pulled back from the corner, heart rate steady but rising. "Contact," he whispered. Inside. Caleb didn't move. The word hung in his mind the same way it used to. Short, sharp, final. No room for doubt. No room for hesitation. Bruno's body tightened behind him, a low growl building deep in his chest, controlled but ready to break. Caleb lifted a hand slightly, fingers tightening into a fist. "Hold." The dog obeyed instantly, the growl cutting off mid-breath, though the tension in his frame didn't ease. Another sound came from inside the cabin. A scrape, metal against wood. Caleb's pulse steadied, not faster, just sharper. Every sense narrowed, locking onto the structure in front of him. He shifted his footing slightly, angling his body away from the doorway, pressing closer to the wall. No sudden moves, no noise. He leaned in just enough to catch a better angle through the narrow gap between warped boards along the side. Dark inside. Then, a flicker. Flashlight beam. Quick. Controlled. Sweeping low. Not random. Searching. Caleb pulled back immediately. Not alone. He glanced down at Bruno. The dog's eyes were fixed on the door now, ears pinned forward, muscles coiled. Caleb leaned close, voice barely a breath. 2, maybe more. Bruno didn't react, but the tip of his tail flicked once. Caleb's mind worked through it fast. Unknown number inside. Limited cover outside. High ground behind them, but exposed on approach. No clean way out if they were spotted. He scanned the tree line again. Wind direction. Slight cross breeze from the ridge. Good. Sound would carry sideways, not straight to the door. Caleb shifted his weight and slowly began to move, circling toward the back of the cabin. Step. Pause. Step. Bruno followed in perfect silence, placing his paws where Caleb had just stepped, minimizing noise. Another flicker of light flashed through the front window. Then a voice. Low. Muffled. Told you he'd come this way. Caleb froze. Bruno's head snapped slightly toward the sound. The second voice answered. Doesn't matter. He's got nowhere else to go. Caleb's jaw tightened. They weren't searching randomly. They were waiting. For him. A branch cracked underfoot somewhere behind the cabin. Too sharp. Too loud. Caleb's head turned instantly. Wrong. That wasn't them. That was movement. Off to the right. A figure breaking through the trees, boots slipping slightly on the wet slope. Caleb reacted without thinking. Move! He hissed. He grabbed Bruno's collar and pulled him hard toward the incline just as a shot cracked through the woods. The sound split the air, echoing off the ridge. Wood splintered behind them, where the bullet struck the cabin wall. Bruno lunged forward, dragging Caleb with him as they dove down the slope. Loose dirt gave way under their weight. They slid hard, gravel tearing at Caleb's palms as he twisted mid-fall, keeping his body between the dog and the direction of fire. Another shot rang out. Closer. Caleb rolled, grabbing Bruno's harness, pulling him behind a thick tree trunk just as bark exploded from the other side. Stay down, he snapped. Bruno dropped instantly, body pressed low, but his eyes stayed locked uphill, teeth bared now. Caleb leaned just enough to peek around the trunk. Two men, one near the cabin door, weapon raised, the other halfway down the slope, advancing fast. Not amateurs. They moved with purpose. Spread out, cutting angles. Caleb's breathing slowed again. Inhale, hold, release. He scanned quickly. Distance, cover, terrain. No weapon, no advantage. Just movement. Left, he whispered. Bruno shifted immediately, reading the command. Caleb broke from cover, sprinting low across the slope, zigzagging through trees, forcing the shooter to adjust. A third shot cracked, too wide. Caleb changed direction again without warning, cutting downhill into thicker brush. Bruno kept pace, silent except for the rhythm of his breath. Then, a sharp yelp. Caleb's heart dropped. He glanced back. Bruno stumbled for half a step, rear leg dragging slightly before he caught himself. Blood. Not heavy. But there. Keep moving, Caleb barked. The dog didn't hesitate. They pushed deeper into the trees, branches snapping behind them as the men shouted, voices sharp now. Cut them off! Don't lose him! Caleb angled toward a narrow dip in the terrain, spotting a shallow ravine ahead. He slid down into it, grabbing Bruno again, pulling him tight against the bank. They stayed low. Still. The footsteps above them thundered past, one set veering left, the other right, splitting up, hunting. Caleb pressed a hand against Bruno's leg. Warm. Wet. But the bleeding had slowed. Hold, he whispered again. The dog's breathing was heavier now, but steady. His eyes never left the ridge above. Minutes passed. Or seconds. Time blurred. The forest settled slowly, the sounds of pursuit fading into distance. Caleb leaned his head back against the cold dirt wall of the ravine, eyes closing for just a fraction of a second. Gunfire. Dust. Voices screaming over comms. He snapped them open again. Not there. Not anymore. But close enough. He looked down at Bruno. You all right, partner? The dog didn't answer, of course, but his tail gave one slow, stubborn thump against the ground. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Yeah, he muttered. Thought so. He shifted slightly, pulling the map from his coat with one hand, careful not to disturb the dog too much. His eyes locked onto the next marked point. Further up the ridge. Deeper. He looked back toward where the shots had come from. They're not done, he said quietly. Bruno's ears twitched. Caleb folded the map again, slipping it back inside his coat. Neither are we. Above them, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the faintest echo of voices searching the wrong direction. For now. The forest didn't forgive mistakes. Caleb knew that better than most. He waited another full minute before moving, listening for anything out of place. Footsteps, radio chatter, the scrape of boots against rock. Nothing came back but wind and the distant trickle of water. Up, he whispered. Bruno pushed himself to his feet without hesitation, though his injured leg trembled slightly before settling. He didn't whine, didn't look for sympathy, just shifted his weight and stood ready. Caleb noticed. He always did. Easy, he murmured, crouching beside him. He tore a strip from the inner lining of his coat and wrapped it tight around the dog's leg, fingers working quickly but careful, keeping pressure where the blood had seeped through fur. Bruno held still. Only his breathing gave anything away. There you go, Caleb said quietly, finishing the knot. Still got fight in you. The dog's eyes stayed locked uphill. Caleb followed that gaze again. The cabin. Still there. Still waiting. He exhaled slowly. All right. he said. "We finish it." They circled wide this time. Caleb didn't approach from the same angle. He moved higher along the ridge, using elevation and tree cover, keeping the structure below his line of sight until the last possible moment. Bruno limped slightly now, but he didn't slow the pace. If anything, he moved with more intent, less wandering, more direct, like he knew exactly where to go. Caleb kept them downwind. Every few steps he paused, listening. Nothing. No voices. No movement. Either the men had pushed further downslope, or they were waiting again. He didn't assume anything. The back of the cabin came into view through the trees. No windows on this side. Just a warped wooden wall and a section where the boards had begun to rot away at the base. Caleb dropped low. He scanned the ground. No fresh prints he could see, but the leaf cover made that unreliable. He shifted closer, crouching near the back wall. "I'll stay," he whispered. Bruno lowered himself instantly, body pressed flat against the earth, eyes still scanning. Caleb leaned in, pressing his ear lightly against the wood. Silence. No movement inside. He pulled back and moved along the wall until he found the gap, where the wood had decayed enough to leave a narrow opening. He angled his body, keeping most of himself covered, and looked through. Dark. Then slowly, his eyes adjusted. The inside of the cabin was smaller than he expected. One main room, table, shelves, and in the center, a section of floor that didn't match the rest. Newer boards. Caleb's pulse shifted. He moved back, circling toward the front again, slower this time, more deliberate. Still nothing. No sign of the men. But the absence felt wrong. Too clean. Too easy. He reached the door. The new padlock hung there, untouched. Caleb didn't bother with it. Instead, he stepped to the side and drove his shoulder hard into the frame. The wood cracked. The second hit splintered it open. The door swung inward with a sharp bang that echoed through the cabin. Caleb moved immediately, stepping inside, body low, eyes sweeping left, right, center. Clear. No movement. No one waiting. But the feeling didn't leave. Bruno followed a second later, limping slightly, but his attention went straight to the center of the room, the floor. Caleb saw it clearly now. Boards that didn't match the rest. He crossed the room quickly and dropped to one knee, pressing his hand against the wood. Solid, but not original. He grabbed a loose tool from the table, a rusted pry bar, and wedged it between the seams. The first board lifted with a sharp crack, then another. Dust rose, old air, and beneath, metal, a safe, larger than the box in the storage unit, industrial, heavy, embedded into the foundation itself. Caleb wiped dirt away from the surface. Same marking. RH. He stared at it for a long second, then forced it open. The hinges groaned as the door gave way. Inside, stacks, documents, bundles thicker than anything he'd seen in the unit, and something else. Cloth-wrapped packages. Caleb pulled one free, unwrapping it slowly. Gold, coins, old, heavy, stamped. He stared at them, then set them aside. Not important. Not the real weight. He reached for the documents instead. Flipped one open. His eyes moved fast, then stopped. Not just land transfers. Not just ownership. Confessions. Signed statements. Records of forced sales. Pressure. Threats. Families pushed off their land. Signatures that didn't match. Dates that didn't line up. Everything tied back to the same name. Redstone Holdings. Caleb's hand tightened on the paper. For a second, the cabin wasn't there anymore. It was dust again, Heat. A village half buried in rubble. A man shouting in a language he didn't understand, holding papers that didn't matter anymore. A child crying somewhere behind him. Orders over comms. Move through. Clear it. Caleb blinked hard. The paper shook slightly in his hand. Not from fear, from memory. He lowered it slowly. "This isn't money," he said under his breath. Bruno shifted beside him, watching. Caleb looked at the stacks again, then at the gold, then back to the documents. "This is why they're hunting." Bruno let out a low, steady breath. Caleb nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "I get it." He began gathering the papers, moving fast now, prioritizing what mattered. Maps, signed records, anything that proved what he was seeing. Not everything, just enough. The floor creaked behind him. Caleb froze. Bruno's head snapped toward the door. A shadow stretched across the threshold. Caleb didn't turn. Didn't need to. He already knew. They weren't alone anymore. Caleb didn't turn. The shadow stretched across the warped floorboards, long and steady, cutting through the weak light filtering in from the broken doorway. No rush. No panic. Whoever stood there wasn't afraid. Bruno rose slowly beside him, weight shifting off his injured leg just enough to stay balanced. A low, controlled growl rolled through his chest again, deeper this time, sharper. Caleb placed one hand lightly against the dog's shoulder. Easy. The growl softened, but didn't disappear. Footsteps creaked once on the wood. "Found something interesting?" a voice said. Caleb knew that voice. Same one from the bridge. Calm, controlled, like this was already decided. Caleb kept his eyes on the open safe, on the stacks of paper inside it. "Just old paperwork," he said evenly. A faint chuckle came from behind him. "Yeah," the man replied. "That's exactly what it is." Another set of footsteps entered the cabin. 2 now, maybe more outside. Caleb counted without looking. Distance to door, 6 steps. Window, blocked. No clean exit. The first man moved closer. Caleb could feel it in the shift of air behind him. "You picked the wrong unit," the man continued. "Should have walked away when you had the chance." Caleb finally turned. 2 men stood in the doorway. Same ones from the bridge. Dark jackets, clean boots, eyes that didn't wander. Professionals. One of them held a pistol low at his side. Not raised. Didn't need to be. "Funny," Caleb said quietly. "You were the ones waiting for me." The man smiled slightly. "Let's just say we knew someone would get curious." His gaze dropped briefly to the open safe, then back to Caleb. "And now here we are." Bruno stepped forward half a pace. The man's eyes flicked to him. "Call off your dog." Caleb didn't move. He doesn't like being told what to do. A pause. The second man shifted his stance slightly, angling to the side. Cutting off the exit. Caleb noticed. Always noticed. "Here's how this goes," the first man said, voice still calm. "You hand over whatever you took. You walk away. You get to keep breathing." Bruno's growl sharpened. Caleb reached slowly into his coat. Both men tensed. Hands tightened. Caleb pulled out the folded documents, held them up. For a second, no one moved. Rain tapped against the broken roof above them. Wind slipped through the trees outside. Caleb looked down at the papers. Signatures. Names. Families that had been pushed out. Land taken piece by piece. He saw it clearly now. Not just a scheme, a system. And he knew systems like that. He'd seen what they did. He'd followed orders inside them once. His grip tightened slightly. The first man extended his hand. "Give it here." Caleb didn't move. Instead, he glanced down at Bruno. The dog looked back at him, steady, waiting, trusting, always trusting. Caleb let out a slow breath. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a memory pushed forward. A road in Afghanistan. Dust rising behind a convoy. A decision made too fast. A door kicked in without thinking. A man on the other side who hadn't deserved what came next. Caleb blinked once. Came back. The cabin. The men. The papers. "This isn't yours," Caleb said quietly. The man's smile faded. "Everything here belongs to someone," he replied. "And right now, it's not you." Caleb shook his head once. "No," he said. "It belongs to the people you took it from." Silence filled the room. The second man shifted again. Impatience now. "Last chance," the first man said, voice tightening just enough to matter. Caleb looked at the papers one more time, then folded them carefully, slipped them back inside his coat. The man's eyes hardened. Wrong answer. Bruno barked once, sharp, loud, echoing off the walls. Everything moved at once. The second man stepped forward. The first raised his weapon. Caleb grabbed the nearest loose board and kicked it hard toward them, sending dust and splinters flying into their line of sight. "Move!" he snapped. Bruno lunged forward, not at the men, but past them, breaking their focus. Caleb followed, driving his shoulder into the first man, knocking him sideways just as the shot fired wide, slamming into the wall behind him. They burst through the doorway into the open air. Rain hit them hard. Caleb didn't stop. He grabbed Bruno's harness and pulled him down the slope again, faster this time, not zigzagging, just distance. Shots cracked behind them, closer, too close. Branches snapped as they tore through the trees, slipping, catching, pushing forward. Bruno stumbled once, his injured leg faltering. Caleb hauled him upright without breaking stride. "Stay with me!" he shouted. The dog surged forward again, refusing to slow. They didn't stop until the ridge dropped away into a narrow cut between rocks, hidden from above. Caleb pulled them both into it, pressing flat against the stone, breath coming harder now. The gunfire stopped. Voices echoed faintly somewhere behind them. Frustrated, distant. For now. Caleb leaned his head back against the rock, rain running down his face. He reached down, resting his hand against Bruno's neck. The dog's breathing was rough, but steady, alive. Caleb closed his eyes for just a second, then opened them again. "We're not running anymore," he said quietly. Bruno's tail tapped once against the stone. Caleb looked back toward the ridge, toward the cabin, toward everything buried up there. This doesn't end here. Caleb pushed himself up from the rock, ignoring the ache spreading through his shoulders. The rain had eased, but the forest still dripped, every branch shedding water in slow, uneven drops. Bruno stood beside him, favoring his back leg more now. The bandage had darkened, but the bleeding hadn't worsened. "Still with me?" Caleb asked quietly. Bruno's ears twitched. His tail gave a short, stubborn flick. Caleb nodded once. "Good." He pulled the documents from his coat again, flipping through them with faster hands this time. No hesitation, no second guessing. Coordinates, transfers, names. One page stood out. Different paper, cleaner, newer. A legal letterhead. Rachel Dunn. Caleb frowned slightly. He scanned the contents. Environmental litigation. Land seizure disputes. Redstone Holdings named repeatedly. And at the bottom, an address in a nearby town. Someone who had already been fighting this. He folded the page carefully. "Not just us," he murmured. Bruno watched him, head slightly tilted. Caleb looked back toward the ridge. The men would regroup, spread out again, push lower, cut off exits. They'd expect him to keep running. He didn't. "Time to change direction," he said. The road curved along the mountainside in long, narrow bends, barely wide enough for two vehicles to pass. Gravel crunched under tires, the sound carrying farther than it should in the damp air. Caleb stood just off the shoulder, half hidden behind a line of brush. Below, the valley stretched out in gray layers of mist. Above, the ridge loomed dark and silent. Bruno stood close, steady despite the limp, eyes fixed down the road. They hadn't waited long. The black SUV came into view around the bend, moving slow, controlled, not searching blindly anymore, tracking. Caleb stepped out just enough to be seen. The vehicle slowed, then stopped, engine idling. For a moment, neither side moved. Then the driver's door opened. One of the men stepped out. Same one from before. Calm, confident, like he'd already won. "Thought you'd run farther," he called out. Caleb didn't answer. He adjusted his stance slightly, feet planted on uneven ground, weight balanced. The man took a few steps forward, stopping just short of the ditch. "You don't have a way out," he said. "Not up here." Caleb glanced past him at the SUV. Second man still inside, watching, waiting. "Funny," Caleb said quietly. "You keep saying that." The man smiled faintly. "Because it's true." Bruno stepped forward half a pace, teeth showing now, a low warning rumble building again. The man's eyes flicked to him. "Dog's hurt," he noted. "Won't last much longer." Caleb's gaze hardened. He's lasted longer than most. A pause. Wind moved through the trees above them, carrying the faint smell of wet earth and engine oil. Caleb shifted slightly to his left. The man noticed. Too late. Caleb moved. He grabbed a loose rock from the ground and hurled it hard toward the SUV, not at the man, but at the windshield. The impact cracked sharp. The driver flinched. In that split second, Caleb lunged forward, closing distance fast, forcing the man to react. The man reached for his weapon. Bruno exploded forward. Despite the injured leg, he launched himself low and fast, slamming into the man's side. Teeth clamped onto his arm, dragging it down, throwing off his aim. The gun fired. Wide. Caleb hit the man full force, driving him backward into the ditch. They went down hard, mud and water splashing around them. The second man jumped from the SUV, weapon raised. Caleb rolled, grabbing the first man's wrist, twisting hard. The gun slipped free, skidding across the gravel. Bruno held on, growling, refusing to release. "Let go!" the man shouted, trying to shake him off. Caleb drove his shoulder into him again, knocking the wind out of his chest. The second man fired. The shot ricocheted off the road barrier, sparks flashing. Too close. Caleb grabbed Bruno's harness. "Back!" The dog released instantly, limping but moving. Caleb shoved the first man away and scrambled up the slope toward the trees, pulling Bruno with him. The second man fired again. Another miss. They hit the tree line and disappeared into cover just as more shots echoed behind them. Branches whipped against Caleb's face as he pushed forward. Lungs burning now, legs heavy but moving. Bruno stayed beside him. Didn't fall behind. Didn't quit. They didn't stop until the road noise faded completely, until the forest swallowed them again. Caleb slowed, finally dropping to one knee beside a fallen log. He checked Bruno's leg quickly, still bleeding, but holding. "You did good," he said, voice low. Bruno leaned into him, breathing hard but steady. Caleb looked back through the trees. "They'll come again," he said. "Not fear, just fact." He reached into his coat, touching the folded papers, then looked toward the valley below. Rachel Dunn, A way to end this. For real. Caleb pushed himself up again, one hand resting briefly on Bruno's back. "Come on," he said. The dog rose with him. Together they turned away from the ridge and headed toward the town below. The forest thinned as they descended, trees giving way to scattered fences and long-forgotten dirt paths that once led to farms no one worked anymore. The air changed too, less damp, less wild. Civilization, faint but present. Caleb didn't slow. Bruno kept pace beside him, limping more noticeably now, but still refusing to fall behind. Every few steps his ears would twitch, checking their back trail, always checking. By the time they reached the edge of town, the sky had cleared just enough to let a dull gray light settle over the streets. Small buildings lined the main road, gas station, diner, hardware store. People moved slowly, heads down, unaware of what had been buried just miles above them. Caleb kept to the edges, didn't draw attention, didn't stop. The address on the paper led him to a narrow brick building near the courthouse. A simple sign hung above the door. Dunn and Associates, Environmental Law. Caleb stood across the street for a moment, watching. Old habit. He scanned the windows. Reflections. Movement inside. No one waiting outside. No black SUV. "For now, stay close," he said. Bruno didn't need telling. Caleb crossed the street and pushed the door open. A bell chimed softly overhead. The warmth inside hit him first. Then the smell of paper, coffee, and something clean, something normal. A woman behind the front desk looked up. Her expression shifted slightly when she saw him, taking in the coat, the dirt, the dog. "Can I help you?" she asked, polite but guarded. Caleb didn't waste time. "I need to see Rachel Dunn." The woman hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out one of the documents. He slid it across the desk. The woman glanced down. Her expression changed instantly. "Wait here," she said, standing quickly. She disappeared through a back door. Caleb stayed where he was. Bruno sat beside him, eyes scanning the room, tracking every movement, every sound. Footsteps approached from the hallway. Faster. A woman stepped into view. Mid-40s, sharp eyes. No hesitation in her stride. Rachel Dunn. She took one look at Caleb, then at the paper in his hand. "Where did you get this?" she asked. No greeting. No small talk. Caleb held her gaze. "Up in the ridge," he said. "Hidden." She stepped closer, taking the document, scanning it quickly. Her jaw tightened. "Redstone," she murmured. Caleb nodded once. "There's more." He reached into his coat again, pulling out the rest of the papers. Maps, signed statements, evidence. He handed them over. Rachel flipped through them, faster now, eyes moving with purpose. Each page seemed to confirm something she already knew, but had never been able to prove. "Jesus," she whispered. She looked up at him. "Do you understand what this is?" Caleb didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced down at Bruno. The dog's breathing had slowed, but his leg trembled slightly under the strain. Then Caleb looked back at her. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do." Rachel nodded slowly. "This is everything," she said. "This is proof, enough to take them down, enough to give those families their land back." She turned toward the hallway. "I need to call this in. State level. Federal, maybe." She stopped, looked back at Caleb. "They'll come for this." Caleb gave a slight nod. They already did. Rachel's eyes flicked to Bruno, then back to Caleb. "You can't stay out there," she said. "Not now." Caleb shook his head. "Not planning to." A noise cut through the room. The bell above the door. All three of them turned. Two men stepped inside. Same jackets. Same calm expressions. The air shifted instantly. Rachel straightened. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice firm now. The first man smiled slightly. "Actually," he said, eyes moving past her to Caleb. "You can." Bruno rose slowly, placing himself between Caleb and the men. The second man closed the door behind them. Quiet, controlled. "We're here for the documents," the first man said. Rachel didn't move. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's unfortunate." Caleb stepped forward slightly. "Not her problem," he said. The man looked at him. "It is now." A beat of silence stretched across the room. Rachel's grip tightened on the papers. Then she stepped back. Toward the hallway. "Call it in," Caleb said quietly. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then turned and moved. Fast. The second man stepped forward. Bruno barked. Loud, sharp, enough to stop him cold. Caleb didn't wait. He grabbed a chair and shoved it hard across the floor, slamming it into the man's legs. The impact knocked him off balance just long enough. The first man reached inside his jacket, but Caleb was already moving. Not toward them, toward the door. "Move!" he snapped. Bruno pivoted instantly. They burst outside into the street. Voices rose behind them, but Caleb didn't look back, didn't stop. He pushed forward into the crowd, blending, disappearing, moving fast, but controlled. Bruno stayed tight at his side. No hesitation, no fear. Behind them, sirens began to echo faintly in the distance. Caleb slowed just enough to catch his breath. He glanced down at Bruno. "Did our part," he said quietly. The dog's tail gave a small, tired wag. Caleb looked back once, toward the law office, toward everything that had started in a rusted storage unit. It's in their hands now. For the first time since the ridge, he let himself walk, not run. Caleb moved through the town at a steady pace, shoulders relaxed just enough to pass for ordinary. People brushed past him without a second glance. A man carrying groceries, a woman talking on her phone, a kid dragging a backpack too heavy for his frame. Normal life. It felt distant. Bruno stayed close, his limp more visible now. But he didn't slow. His head stayed level, eyes tracking movement, instinct never fully shutting off. Caleb noticed. He always would. They reached the edge of town just as the sirens grew louder behind them, echoing between the buildings. Not chaos, controlled, official, handled. Caleb didn't look back. He kept walking until the pavement turned to gravel, then to dirt. The road narrowed, winding along the edge of a tree line before opening into a small clearing. A cabin stood there. Not abandoned, not broken. Just simple. Wood walls, patched but solid. A small porch with 2 uneven steps. Smoke curled faintly from a metal pipe, disappearing into the gray sky. Caleb stopped. Bruno stepped forward first this time, slower, cautious. He sniffed the air, then the ground, then the edge of the porch. No tension, no warning. He climbed the steps and turned once, looking back. Caleb followed. Inside, the space was quiet. A workbench along one wall, tools laid out in careful rows, a small stove in the corner, a cot pushed against the far side. Nothing extra, nothing wasted. Caleb set his pack down near the door. For a moment, he just stood there, listening. No distant engines, no footsteps, no voices calling his name, just the soft creak of wood and the faint crackle from the stove. Bruno circled once, then lowered himself near the doorway, positioning himself where he could see both inside and out, always watching. Caleb walked to the window, looked out toward the trees. The ridge was somewhere beyond them, hidden now by distance and fog. Whatever had been buried up there was no longer his to carry. He reached into his coat. One paper remained. Not evidence. Not a map. Just a copy of a single page. One of the names listed among the stolen land. An old signature. A family that had never gotten it back. Caleb folded it once more and set it down on the workbench. Then he moved to the sink, filling a metal bowl with water. He brought it over and knelt beside Bruno. "Let's take a look," he said quietly. The dog didn't resist. Caleb unwound the makeshift bandage, revealing the wound beneath. It wasn't deep, but it had torn enough to matter. He cleaned it carefully, slow and steady, ignoring the slight tremor in his own hands. Bruno didn't pull away, didn't flinch, just watched him. "There you go," Caleb murmured, tying a fresh wrap in place. He sat back on his heels for a moment, studying the dog. "You didn't have to do that." Bruno blinked once. Caleb let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Yeah," he said, "I know." He pushed himself up and moved to the stove, adding a piece of wood. The flame shifted, growing just enough to warm the room. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, softer now. Caleb sat down on the edge of the cot. For the first time in days, he didn't feel the need to map exits, didn't scan shadows, didn't count footsteps. The quiet didn't press in on him. It settled. Bruno shifted, lowering his head onto his paws, eyes still half open, still watching the doorway. Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We're clear," he said quietly. The words hung there. Different this time. Not a command. Not a call over comms. A statement. Bruno's ears twitched once. He lifted his head, looked toward the dark tree line outside, then slowly let it rest again. The tension in his body eased. Caleb watched him for a long second, then leaned back against the wall, eyes drifting closed, not in exhaustion, not in escape, just rest. Outside, the forest held steady. No footsteps, no engines, no shadows moving where they shouldn't. Just wind, just time. And for the first time in a long while, nothing was waiting. "Do you want me to continue?" Nothing was waiting. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. After everything Caleb and Bruno went through, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. So let me ask you something. If you were in his place, would you have taken the money and walked away? Or risked everything to do what's right? Just type 1 if you would have walked away. Or 0 if you would have stayed and fought like Caleb. I read every single comment. And if stories like this mean something to you, real stories about loyalty, survival, and second chances, make sure you hit subscribe. Because the next story might hit even closer to home.